But there's something about Van Gogh's legacy which is much more important than his fathering this or that ism of modern art. Vincent's passionate belief was that people wouldn't just see his pictures, but feel the rush of life in them.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most credible voice in true crime. Today we're going to look at one of three letters that were en route to Vincent van Gogh, or that left his pen, I guess, or left his left Auver's en route to somebody else. There were two to Willemien and his mother, one each, I guess, and then there was one from Paul Gogh to Vincent, actually not asking directly for money, but he was sort of hinting that he could do with some money, I guess. And we will deal with the letter to his mother and from Paul Gogh tomorrow, even though they were written on the 13th. And then we'll also deal with the letter on the 14th from Theo to Vincent on tomorrow. So we'll deal with two letters from the 13th on the 14th and one letter from the 14th on the 14th. Today we're just going to deal with one letter, which is from Willemien. So let's get started. My dear sister, I'm adding a few words for you to Mother's letter. Last Sunday I had a visit from Theo and his family. I find it most agreeable to be less far away from them. Lately I've been working a lot and quickly. By doing so, I'm trying to express the desperately swift passage of things in modern life. Now, I want to emphasize that we're going to talk a little bit about the painting that he's referring to in a second. But what he's saying is, he's almost translating the style of him painting very, very quickly with what he is experiencing as the pace of modern life. Now, bear in mind, this is the pace of modern life 130 years ago. And think about how the pace of modern life changes when you don't have a train. You walk around, you walk, or you go on horseback, and then suddenly you're on a train. And it must feel like you're in a Ferrari going, like on a racetrack. When you've been walking your whole life, and now suddenly you're on a train. And you're seeing trains zooming across the countryside. And it's different to trains today. In that time, when trains passed, you heard them. You sort of heard them roaring by. And you also saw the smoke. And it was quite a fearsome thing. It was like this monster machine moving through the countryside. The other thing that I think was changing was, for example, photography had come out, electricity, the sort of modern newspapers coming about. The whole idea of international news was sort of starting, where something like a newspaper was starting to become a reality then, where even if you're in another country, you could start reading about what is happening in another country. And that, for example, is how Van Gogh was aware of Jack the Ripper and the stories of Sherlock Holmes and Dickens and so on. I'm going to put in the description a wonderful article that is about a book about the books that Vincent van Gogh read, and you can check that out. A really good article. But just think about the craziness of thinking about modern life being rushed 130 years ago and how rushed it is now. I mean, if Van Gogh had to paint today, what would it be? Would it be like a frenzy of dots and swirls and just a blur? Would the whole thing kind of be a blur? And so he describes one of the paintings that he painted to express this idea of the swift passage of things in modern life. So he talks about, yesterday in the rain, I painted a large landscape viewed from a height in which there are fields as far as the eye can see, different types of greenery, a dark green field of potatoes, between the regular plants, the lush violet earth, a field of peas in flower whitening to the side, a field of pink flowered lucerne with a small figure of a reaper, a field of long ripe grass, fawn in hue, then wheat fields, poplars, a last line of blue hills on the horizon, at the bottom of which a train is passing, leaving behind it an immense trail of white smoke in the greenery. Now I've placed a sample of this particular painting, which is called Landscape with a Carriage and a Train. I've put a sample that you can see, and that's going to be the main picture in this episode. It's not going to be a very long episode because we're dealing with just this one letter to Willemien. It's also the same sister that he wrote to last time. He doesn't seem to write to the other sisters, or even acknowledge them, or even pass on good wishes to them. But what is interesting is he's sort of talking about, even his description of the scene is actually quite kind of poetic. It's quite beautiful. It's quite artistic in a way. And so what I can tell you is, I've got at the moment I've got 3 images of Van Gogh in my bedroom. The one I've already told you about, it's the one with the thatched cottages. This is the second. I've also got this image in my bedroom. It's kind of a twin to the one with the thatched cottages. It's not a very big image, but they're just sort of side by side, not directly side by side, but there's an arch between separating them, but they're on the same sort of level, and they kind of reflect one another, or they are meant to complement one another. So this particular image has got some sort of sentimental value for me, in the sense that when I was in Orvez, I stayed. I actually stayed for I think 1 or 2 nights on the one side of Orvez, so on the side, I guess, away from Dr. Gachet's home, and then I stayed, I think, 2 more nights on the side closer to Chaponval, which is much closer to Dr. Gachet's home, but it's also it's on the Dr. Gachet side, away from the Revue Inn, if that makes sense. It was on kind of a steep hillside. I still need to take you through my journey through Orvez and all of that, but what I'll never forget was, it was actually quite rainy when this happened, like when he painted this painting. It was sunny for the whole time I was in Orvez, and then one day it was just sort of drizzly, like out of the blue, and I opened these big bay windows. I was staying in an Airbnb, and I decided to spend a lot of money on one particular Airbnb in my entire trip, and this was it. I just thought I would splurge for like 1 or 2 nights or something, and so I splurged in this particular place, and just had this beautiful. It was a beautiful room in a beautiful mansion, and I think it was 3 stories high, but on top of a hill, on top of the ridge that sort of dominates the Oise River in Orvez. And I remember waking up. I think I slept with the windows open, but I remember waking up to this roaring sound, and I thought a storm was coming, or hail was coming, or a rain or thunderstorm was sort of moving across the countryside. And what it was a train that was simply moving through the valley, and it was creating like a great echo. Just the sound of the train, the metal wheels moving on the metal rails, creating this loud noise that was reverberating through the valley. And it wasn't a steam train. It was, I think, an electric train. But it still had this charming acoustic effect. And, I think I sort of jumped out of bed to see what the sound was. And I looked out the window and saw this train. And I realized, wow, there's a train moving down there. And one can only imagine what sort of sound a steam train would have made. These deep, guffing, puffing sounds, just also reverberating through the valley. There's this kind of sound, and if you weren't used to steam trains, then you might think of this as the march of technology. Now, this might be revealing my age, but when I grew up, there were two very strange sounds that I heard as a child, very early in the morning, especially in winter. There's something about winter that the air is so cold that it's almost like it's a better conduit of sound. And so I remember on very cold mornings, I heard two sounds that were very out of the ordinary, I think not only for South Africa but for anywhere in the world. And the one was a lion roaring, and that was lions that were in the zoo, in the local zoo. And they'd sort of roar in the morning, and you could actually hear it from a couple of miles away. And then also the sound of steam trains sort of jostling for position at the station, which was even further than the zoo away, but nevertheless the sound carried. And so you'd hear this strange combination of sounds, lion roaring and a steam train. Well, that was just my memory. But as I say, when I was in Orvez, I had this experience from this mansion, looking down on this train, and maybe that's why this particular artwork has got some sort of sentimental, it's not obviously a very deep emotional sort of thing, but it was just a charming moment, and obviously it was for Van Gogh as well. So he goes on to say that this train leaves behind it an immense trail of white smoke in the greenery. And think about what that looks like. He's talking about this white smoke in almost moving through a forest. And that is exactly what Orvez is like. Orvez is like kind of a jungle, like a garden of roses and of trees and whatnot, kind of straddling this river. And then there's civilization sort of peeking through it, if that makes sense. And then he also talks about a white road crosses the canvas, and on the road a little carriage and white houses with stark red roofs beside this road. Fine rain streaks the whole with blue or grey lines. So the irony is, when I saw this train, it was also drizzling, so it was just a little bit of a strange deja vu in a way, artistic deja vu. Something that I guess I only noticed after I returned home and after I bought the print is the roofs in the image are very, very red. They're like a bright red color. And when I was in Orvez, the roofs were a kind of a dull, almost rusted red, right? And so obviously when Van Gogh arrived in Orvez, something like what do you call it? Tiled roof house was something like a modern innovation. So in other words, this was the crossover from, like you get television and then you get, say, YouTube, right? So this was like the transition from thatched housing, thatched roofing, to a tiled roof. And at this stage it was so new that the red roofs were like bright red, just like shining and new. And I only realized it, I guess, when I put the picture up in my bedroom. I was sort of, you wake up in the morning and you look at it and you say, wow, that's a really bright red. What's going on there? And the reason is because it was very, very new. And it's probably something that he didn't really see in Orvez, in Arles, and he was seeing it in Orvez. And this is what he was talking about, the swift passage of things in modern life. When you start seeing buildings around you change in significant ways, where structural aspects that have been used for perhaps hundreds of years, are suddenly replaced by something better, that can be quite a wrenching change. If you've lived besides a gravel road for years and watched vehicles sort of crawl on these roads, a little bit carefully, and then that road gets replaced one day with a highway, it feels almost traumatic, how quickly the world changes when that happens. They also talk about when a station is built by a particular town, that town's character changes completely. The same way, if a station is removed from a town, an entire commercial area can sort of completely shut down. So anyway, he talks about an amazing thing is he painted this while it was raining, and bear in mind that Van Gogh paints in plein air, which means he's outside when he paints. So I don't know whether he had an umbrella or something, but it was obviously quite a interesting moment for him. Obviously it was summer, so he wouldn't have, even if it rained, he wouldn't have necessarily gotten cold, but it was obviously quite a moving and meaningful moment for him to write about it in such detail. Then he speaks about there's another landscape with vineyards and meadows in the foreground, the roofs of the village coming behind, and another one with nothing but a green field of wheat which extends to a white villa surrounded by a white wall with a single tree. Then he says, I've done the portrait of Mr. Gogh with an expression of melancholy which might often appear to be a grimace to those looking at the canvas. Now bear in mind, Dr. Gogh's job is almost to treat Van Gogh for melancholy, and now here he's painting Dr. Gogh as a fairly depressed, miserable fellow. Ironic, isn't it? He goes on to say, and yet that's what should be painted, because then one can realize, compared to the calm ancient portraits, how much expression there is in our present day heads, and passion, and something like waiting and a shout. Sad but gentle, but clear and intelligent. That's how many portraits should be done, that would still have a certain effect on people at times. There are modern heads that one will go on looking at for a long time, that one will perhaps regret 100 years afterwards. If I were 10 years younger with what I know now, how much ambition I would have for working on that. In the given conditions, I can't do very much. I neither frequent nor would know how to frequent sufficiently the sort of people I would like to influence. And this seems to be a reference to Dr. Gogh, and maybe even Marguerite Gogh. For the first time in many letters, he talks about negative feelings regarding himself. The last time he did that was sort of when he was in Saint-Remy, but before he'd decided to leave, when he was just unhappy there. And now for the first time he sort of talks about regret, and he talks about the passage of time and modern and hundreds of years, and he seems to have suddenly gotten a sense of perspective on things. And then he talks about being 10 years younger. Now why on earth would he talk about that? Why would he want to be 10 years younger? Now just think about it. He's 37 years old. If he was 10 years younger, he'd be 27 years old. And how old is Marguerite? She's 20. And I don't know about you, but I would think that a woman of about 20 and a man of about 27, that would be a potential match. You have matches like that all the time. And is that where his mind is at? Is he thinking, well, I wish I was 10 years younger because then this doctor's daughter might be interested in me, right? And he also talks about he just doesn't know the kind of people that he would like to influence, and that also seems to be sort of kicking against the wall, just wishing that he had a bit more social power. Where does that come from? And then he says to his sister, I do hope to do your portrait one day. And doesn't that speak of, at this point he still hasn't done Marguerite's portrait. He keeps talking about that he's done Dr. Gachet's portrait, but he's still thinking about doing portraits, and obviously he's imagining and hoping and betting on doing Marguerite Gachet's portrait, but that still hasn't happened yet. And now there are strange feelings of conflict within himself, where he feels certain feelings of regret and the passage of time. And then, anyway, he then wraps up saying, "I'm very curious to have another letter from you, more soon I hope. I kiss you affectionately in thought, ever yours, Vincent." And one wonders whether he kissed Marguerite affectionately in thought. Anyway, on that note, I'm not going to take it further than that, but I hope this is going to leave you with some food for thought. We'll try and get through 3 letters tomorrow from very different people. Paul Gogh, that's going to be quite an interesting one. A letter from Vincent to his mother, and then also a letter from Theo to Vincent. So we'll get through that tomorrow, obviously dealing with 130 years ago in the life of Vincent van Gogh. Wherever you are, take care, and thank you for listening.